I think even on the question of should we even extend lifespan beyond what's natural, now I think it really comes down to what's your philosophy, why do you think humanity is here, what's our purpose? But fundamentally, I think it's...
So you have Brian Johnson and Kim Kardashian taking stem cells and gene therapy now. What are the other low-hanging fruits that you see in the radical life extension that you're investing in over the next 5 years?
I mean, honestly, the way that we look at the space, we are only investing in technologies which could become...
Welcome to Longevity Unpacked, the Moonshot special. Will Harborne and Sebastian Brunemeier are reimagining what it means to invest in moonshots for human longevity. Their work backs the companies and technologies with the potential to push us towards longevity escape velocity and radical life extension.
A lot of people also say, oh, I'd probably like to live to age 80 and then I'm happy to die. You're not going to feel that way when you're 79.
What are you most bullish, most excited about when it comes to the sort of therapeutics that you think will move the needle furthest? The future of longevity is being shaped in Geneva this October. The Global Longevity Summit is an intimate gathering at the Genolia Innovation Hub, running from October the 28th to the 30th, with pioneers like Aubrey de Grey, Matt Kaberlein, and Amy Killen. I am grateful to be joining as an advisor. And if you would like to be there too, you can get 10% off tickets with the code BEYONDTOMORROW. Just check the description for the link. I'll see you there. Why should someone listen into this conversation?
Sure. We're investing in longevity biotech companies that can add decades of healthy life. And most of pharma is treating late-stage pathology symptoms, whereas we believe that targeting the root cause of disease, which is aging in most of the world, is going to be a lot more successful than the traditional approach.
Personally, I come from outside originally from the longevity space. And what triggered me to come into it was specifically that I now believe that it's possible not just to extend health span, but actually to eventually end aging. So I think particularly when we're talking about moonshots and what we can really do to make big impact on health span, I want to have people leaving, believing that it is possible that one day we can do that.
What motivated you to get into the space? I know, Sebastian, you've been in it for some time. What was your motivation?
Sure. When I was studying undergrad, I thought I was going to be a doctor, medical doctor in the US. And at some point I realized the drugs don't work very well. They don't treat the root cause of disease, which is aging for the most part. Came across the work of Aubrey de Grey, wrote this book, Ending Aging, in which he had an engineering approach to address all of the molecular forms of damage that cause aging. When I realized that it was possible to extend lifespan of many different species in the lab up to 30, 50%, I said to myself, wow, this is an amazing scientific advance. Why isn't this front page news every single day? Why isn't pharma spending 90% of their R&D dollars on slowing the aging process? And that was over a decade ago. Back then, aging was quite fringe. In the last 10 years, it's become sexy. It's become interesting. A lot of academics used to secretly work on aging. So professors would secretly work on aging research and claim they were doing cancer research or something like that because it wasn't fashionable. It was a little taboo. And now that's reversed completely. There are many researchers claiming to work on aging when they're really working on cancer or specific disease. And also pharma, big pharma has gotten interested in the space. So we're here at ARDD conference, the largest longevity conference in the world in Copenhagen. And there are a lot of pharmas here and a lot of VCs here. And that wasn't the case 10 years ago. So we see this sort of exponentially growing interest in the long bio or longevity biotech field.
Well, why do you think this is the right time to be investing, to be coming into this space?
Yeah, as I said, I came from outside the space and I'd been very focused and indexed in my own space, in my own industry as a founder. And quickly, when I first started to dive into longevity, and that came initially from just a personal motivation, I noticed a lot of parallels to the space I'd come from. So I'd been in crypto for the last 10 years. At the beginning of that, there were a few indicators. There was this kind of feeling that so many talented, really driven people were into this space. It was very highly technical and not understood by the kind of broader market and world. And there's a lot of the same stuff happening now in longevity, and especially in longevity biotech, in the sense that people are incredibly driven. And there are amazing founders, amazing scientific talent who believe that we can make a huge dent into the problem of aging. But the rest of the world is only just starting to wake up to this. And so, yeah, there's this kind of like talent factor, and then also a convergence of different technologies which are all coming together at exactly the same time to take sort of research into a real sort of engineering phase where you can build great companies, but which also can transform the kind of lifespan of humans.
On that point, yeah, it's still contrarian to invest in longevity biotech, right? So it's like crypto in the early days, the internet boom in the early days.
When you say longevity biotech, what do you mean?
Sure, yeah. So there are many definitions. One that we often use is a drug that will slow the aging process by targeting one of the fundamental hallmarks of aging. So there are about a dozen different molecular drivers of aging: DNA damage, telomere attrition, epigenetic drift, etc., that addresses one of these fundamental drivers, and that in multiple animal models of disease, or in multiple animals, wild-type aging extends lifespan. So it's pretty straightforward. It's a drug that legitimately slows the aging process, and eventually drugs that reverse the damage that's already been done, which causes aging. So we look at lifespan studies a lot. There are drugs like rapamycin, FDA-approved drug, extends lifespan across many different species, 10, 15% plus. It can turn gray hair and aged mice black again, and it has really profound effects in many different animal models of disease. So what we expect to see is, in the long bio field, a drug that really slows aging is going to be useful as a prophylactic. So,
prophylactic?
Yeah, preventative drug.
Okay.
And it will also treat many different age-related diseases. Think about the GLP-1s. So the best-selling drug class today, it's projected to sell about 100 billion a year. We're here in Copenhagen, Denmark. At one point, Novo Nordisk's valuation was, greater than it equaled the GDP of, the whole country, or some profound number. It's come down, the valuation of the company was equal to the GDP. GLP-1s, they're weight loss drugs. Not everyone is eligible for GLP-1s. Not everyone's overweight, but everyone is eligible for a longevity drug. So we think that it's going to be the best-selling drug category of all time.
There's a saying, if you're too early, you're wrong. Will, do you sometimes feel that people coming into this space are going to be too early? As an example, Aubrey de Grey came on the podcast recently, the longevity godfather. We were talking about longevity escape velocity, this idea of biological or physical immortality. And often we heard that this event would happen maybe in the late 20s, early 30s. He's now saying it's going to happen in the late 30s. Do you sometimes fear that we're too early?
I think that's interesting. And I think that's still a very optimistic timeline in many senses. But yeah, there's been people hoping that we could solve aging for a long time. What's clear is we have tools that we didn't have 10 years ago, and that those tools are exploding. Now, aging is an incredibly difficult, complex process. And so if you look at a classic small molecule drug, like a pill, it's pretty unlikely at this stage that it's going to extend your lifespan by 20, 30 years. We know that. But what's coming through the pipeline are a whole range of techniques that didn't exist in the last wave. So, actually it's only basically just over 10 years ago that we had the ability to edit DNA. And from that, we've now got to the point that pretty much everyone, or a huge proportion of the planet, have had a gene therapy. And so, for example, I'm referring to the COVID vaccine.
Yeah.
But you can go and get, even already today, some longevity gene therapies. I think today there was a tweet by a well-known influencer saying that they've tried one out. So things have accelerated very fast in the last 10 years, and we're in biotech on this kind of exponential curve, of course, accelerated by AI and all the other factors that are accelerating tech generally. I think we're at that moment that's about to see results that translate into engineering rather than just research. But yeah, that's always the risk, is that you're too early. I think what's clear, at least to those who are deeply in the science and looking at the kind of technology changes, is that it's going to be possible. And I think actually now, if you speak to many people working in aging research, there's no fundamental reason in physics why we're not going to be able to slow and hopefully reverse aging. And some of the interesting technologies that we actually look at are outside of that sort of norm spectrum, where it may be that we can actually go much faster towards extending lifespan significantly, but without some of the more conventional approaches. They won't just be pills that you can take, but it might be some more interesting and wacky approaches, which sound sci-fi, but are very possible from an engineering perspective.
So for example, we're very bullish on gene and cell therapy. With cell therapy, stem cells, and other immune cell types, for example, there's already been a revolution in various fields. So we have T-cell therapy, for example, in oncology.
I think great to break down for anyone who hasn't watched some of our previous episodes, what cell therapy is, or stem cell therapy, and then gene therapy.
Sure, yeah. So cell therapy is what it sounds like. You use cells, often derived from yourself or another person. Often they're engineered or treated in some way to make them work better. Sort of textbook example is CAR T. Okay. This was one of the first very popular cell therapies that has been a revolution in oncology and is about to be a revolution in autoimmune disease. T-cell therapy, you take out a certain white blood cell called T cells. They're just kind of the foot soldiers of the immune system. They eliminate cancer cells, infected cells, etc. And you can engineer them so that they're turbocharged and they can hunt down the tumor. And there are cases of patients who have advanced, metastatic cancer, might be in many organs or in the brain, and you can administer T-cell therapy when everything else has failed for these patients, and it will cure them. It can eliminate, pounds of tumor in a matter of months or a month. So this was really the most impressive cell therapy. But you have many different types of cells that you can use. Immune cells, stem cells, mesenchymal stem cells are an area that we're investing in, interested in. And they're widely used today, sort of off-label for restoring joint function, et cetera. And we can get to gene therapy next.
Maybe I'll touch on gene therapies, which, to be honest, is one of the categories I'm most excited about. And so, today, actually, one of the Kardashians tweeted that she had gone and had a gene therapy.
Which one? Was it follistatin?
It was actually VEGF, I believe, which essentially has been shown in lots of studies to potentially be correlated with lifespan. And so this is kind of, we're at the point where these technologies are possible, but the long-term vision, imagine, would be that, okay, everyone has different DNA and some people live much longer. So if you look at supercentenarians, there are certain genes that people who live way beyond 100 have that the rest of the population don't. So if you could edit your own DNA, you could become a supercentenarian. And actually, you could even go beyond that. If we discover new, and understand even more about aging pathways, you could edit your DNA in lots of other ways. Now, the challenge is actually, how do you deliver that to the human body when you're an adult? And that's where there are a lot of advances happening. But today, you can actually go, to many places and have some of these. And people are. Brian Johnson also did one. Yeah, we're kind of on this tipping point. And the more we understand about what genes we want to deliver and the more we improve these techniques, the sooner that comes into people's lives. But these can have like very dramatic impacts long term on lifespan. And we're pretty close to that tipping point. We've invested in companies that are actually trying to get these regulated in the US so that they can be more broadly prescribed for many things, including, for example, frailty. So imagine if you're over age 70, you have an accident, you're hospitalized, you quickly lose muscle mass. But if you could have a gene therapy that helps you quickly rebuild muscle mass, that's going to have a dramatic impact on your health span, but also your lifespan.
You are two of the most prolific investors in this space already. Like, Will, you've just been in the space for a year, Sebastian a bit longer, but I often speak to leading scientists and academics in this space that are very much in their siloed echo chambers, dealing with cell therapy or whatever it is. But you guys have a broad spectrum where you can basically have a bird's eye view of what's going on across the whole sector. And so moonshots and really understanding where this space is going to go. I don't think I have two better people to be speaking to right now. So let's start with it. We'll finish with the wacky stuff that Will has mentioned. Sebastian, what are you most bullish or most excited about when it comes to the sort of therapeutics that you think will move the needle furthest to reaching reverse aging or biological immortality?
I think it's going to have to be some form of gene therapy, ultimately. So you had Matt Schultz on the podcast of Ocean Bio. We're investors in this company, along with AbbVie Ventures, a $100 billion big pharma, that distinguishes a human that lives maybe 80 years from a bowhead whale that lives 200 years, or a tree like a ginkgo tree that lives thousands of years, is the genome. And we're starting to be able to rewrite the code of life, both in the germline, so like embryos, and in developed adults.
Germlines keeps on getting mentioned in the DNA space. Can you explain that exactly?
Sure. The germline are the reproductive cells, so sperm and egg and their progenitors. We've known for a long time, over a century, that these reproductive cells are technically immortal. This is called germline immortality. The developmental biologist Gus Weissman defined this term. And you can think about it like this. Whenever you have a kid, the parents are adults of a certain age, and yet the baby is always brand new. It's always a day zero embryonic stem cell, basically. So how does that happen? Because these reproductive cells have been in your body for, 30 years or whatever, and somehow they can reset the biological clock in advance of giving birth to a baby. And so every species does this, and you can actually trace this immortal lineage all the way back to the dawn of life on this planet, or sexually reproducing species. So we know that biological immortality is physically possible at the level of cells, and that's been true for 1 billion plus years. And humans are just agglomerations of cells working together. In principle, if we can rejuvenate individual cells, we should be able to rejuvenate the whole body. And it's been done by various methods. One that's very popular is epigenetic reprogramming. So there was a Nobel Prize some years ago to Shinya Yamanaka and John Gurdon for basically delivering couple genes to a cell in a petri dish and resetting the epigenetic age and most of the hallmarks of aging. So
what's epigenetic?
Yeah, epigenetics are a set of chemical modifications that sort of unfurl or activate certain genes.
Dumb that down for me a bit more.
Yeah, so the epigenome, it responds to the environment, so it governs gene expression. So, your genes are pretty predictive of who you're going to be and your health risk, et cetera, but there's an additional layer of control, which is environmental factors that turn on and off genes or their volume, their expression
and there's
level.
a sort of popular theory of aging that is very linked to this. So, your DNA stays mostly the same for most of your life, but the epigenetic information around this kind of degrade over time. Your cells, end up not looking the way that they did when you were younger due to this kind of like accumulation of damage in the epigenome.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so a lot of people are interested in Yamanaka reprogramming, transient epigenetic reprogramming. There was a company called Altos Labs launched some years ago. It was the largest seed financing in history. It was $3 billion out of the gate. They hired a lot of leading longevity scientists. They had famous investors like Jeff Bezos and Arch Ventures and Rockefeller Foundation and prominent people. And they're sort of creating a mini big pharma for longevity. And actually, Google did something similar years before called Calico, California Life Sciences Company, and they hired a lot of top talent, raised over $3 billion, did a partnership with AbbVie, the big pharma. And so there's a significant amount of capital coming into the field, but it tends to be concentrated in a small number of names. And I tend to think that one of the reasons why startups are successful is because they have to be scrappy and efficient with capital. If you overload a company with too much capital, it can become bureaucratic and inefficient, kind of like big pharmas or any big corporation is. So we think it makes more sense to invest in a large portfolio of a lot of smaller companies. But in any case, this amount of capital and very intelligent people investing in the field is evidence that the time is coming for longevity biotech. So yeah, Yamanaka reprogramming, it's gotten a lot of attention. It may be a little overhyped relative to the amount of capital and attention because there isn't much lifespan extension data, and there are downsides to it. If the Yamanaka factors are not well controlled, you can get a certain type of tumor. So there are technical challenges to implementing that in vivo, but you can do it ex vivo, inside of the body, but you can do it outside of the body pretty well in, immune cells or stem cells or whatever. The biggest problem in gene therapy is the delivery problem. So today we mostly rely on viruses, viral vectors, to deliver genes to enough cells in the body to make a difference.
So how does that process work?
Yeah, so you engineer these viruses to contain DNA, and then you infuse them in the bloodstream. They mostly end up in the liver.
So you just inject it?
Yeah, you can inject them locally or systemically. And there are some, just into the bloodstream, and it'll circulate, but, mostly ends up in the liver.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of work on tweaking these viral vectors to be better. We mostly like non-viral vector technology. There are a lot of advantages to that. But in any case, if we can deliver some of these super centenarian genes, these long life genes, to enough cells in the body to make a difference and then target their expression, that will be an absolute game changer in medicine. And stem cell therapy is similar. We can infuse stem cells like mesenchymal stem cells or others, or hematopoietic stem cells that make up your immune system, and refresh the function of tissues.
Basically, what you're doing is you're looking at, you said, supercentenarians, so people that have lived, over 100 years or even more, and also at certain animals like the bowhead whale and the naked mole rat. Okay, so animals that live way beyond the same animals, right? The bowhead whale lives until like 200, I think. And so you're looking at their structure, their DNA structure, and through this epigenetic reprogramming, figuring out how we can basically evolve one's DNA, right? And you can probably explain it far better.
I think
but I'm just...
maybe it's easier if we kind of split almost the strategies into a few categories. And category one is kind of advanced bioengineering. Basically, we want to get, as a species, so good at editing the code of life, the DNA, the software of the human body, that we can upgrade it basically to tackle aging. And this is assuming that there are, some fundamental processes, maybe they're programmed in or maybe they're as an accident of evolution, but we want to find the way to edit that software and get rid of the problem of aging.
Yeah.
And, one early strategy for doing it is to look at supercentenarians who have genes that do make them live longer. Longer term, I think we're going way beyond that. We're going to be using, the more we can understand about DNA and about the different components of what make us age, the better the strategies can get. And we probably end up going way beyond actually just, taking genes from other animals or people who live longer, fundamentally kind of rewire some of those processes to prevent aging. The second category, which we haven't spoken about, kind of outside of advanced bioengineering, and that's a very appealing category, but it's very complex. There's loads of unsolved problems. I think humanity will solve them, but it's hard to project how soon. The second category is called replacement, which is more looking at, okay, if you had a car, it's very difficult to kind of design a car that's going to self-heal and not, degrade over time, but you can very quickly get a new wheel, get a new engine and swap it in and out. Yeah. And that's something which is much more feasible from an engineering perspective. And so that would be, for example, growing new organs in different ways or growing new tissues through different processes with stem cells to then put them into the human body and replace damage. And this is a whole other category, which, we could talk about.
Yeah, I would love to go deep on that because it's, again, both sound very sci-fi. When I think about gene therapy, I see an industry that has, or space that has so much potential. And we know that people like Liz Parrish, who was on the podcast, and have had gene therapy already, but it's mainly for rare disease, right? Replacement just sounds like we're in Star Trek kind of territory here. Where are we right now with it all, and how fast do you think it's gonna be possible to have a new limb attached to my body?
It's already possible to grow simple tissues in the lab, vasculature, hollow organs, bladder, things like this.
Vasculature?
Vasculature are blood vessels.
Okay.
And there are some labs, Tony Atala, for example, friend of Aubrey Gray, has gotten a lot of government funding over the years to grow more complex tissues and organs. We can grow skin. He's working on kidneys, but eventually we should, in principle, be able to grow most tissues. It's a super difficult engineering challenge to grow them ex vivo outside the body. There are labs working on interesting other approaches, like in some ways it's easier to grow a whole human with all the organs intact than to grow individual tissues. So there are some labs at prominent universities working on cloning of humans, but without a cortex, so you're not conscious. So you would basically have a backup body, copy of yourself, from which you can derive organs in the future, or these can be used for medical research, say testing drugs on these not possible to be conscious bodies, or for surrogate births, or many other applications.
When we're thinking about how to engineer these sorts of techniques, as much as possible, you want to reuse the kind of you want to use what biology has created through evolution, because it's incredibly sophisticated. It does things really well. So, one approach for growing tissues is to do bioprinting, for example, and you try and print small amounts of cells in some sort of matrix and print it up into a certain shape and then put it in the right environment and try and grow an organ. And, those approaches work. There are lots of people working on them to make certain types of tissues. They have some benefits. Ultimately, it's us trying to kind of backwards engineer stuff, and it's hard to get the right consistency. It's hard to get complex organs and systems using that approach. The other way is to figure out how we can reuse what evolution already does well, which is you start with some stem cells. You can essentially grow naturally, in the case of, for example, like an embryo, all of these systems, and they develop and differentiate on their own. So can you harness those sorts of processes to actually then grow organs? And so there's a great example of a company out called eGenesis, which is growing sort of modified organs within a pig. to create hearts, for example, which you could then transplant into humans. And you could do things that are even better in theory using some of these techniques with cloning to actually then grow organs that are kind of exactly the same genetically as human organs, but without any moral or ethical issues. And so, yeah, these kind of approaches to me are much more promising than some of the more artificial ones, because the kinds of systems that develop are going to look perfect in a way, because you're reusing what biology already knows how to grow.
Yeah, we tend to think that cloning will be one of the major breakthroughs in the field, cloning without a cortex for organs, but eventually humanity will be cloning conscious humans. Maybe we'll be cloning our smartest geniuses for national security reasons, technological development purposes. And then another sort of spicy, interesting one is embryo selection.
Yeah. Can I put, because I'd love just to like break down everything for the listener, because, okay, we've talked about gene therapy, and just to say gene therapies are already being used for anti-aging purposes. And then replacement is a field that we are really in the early innings of. I know that your fund has invested in a few companies in the space, but as in, like, what sort of time horizons are we looking at just to be able to, because the heart in a pig, that's been done, or is it?
So yeah, there's already the first pig heart in a human. I think he went home from hospital after the transplant. It works. So it's early in the innings, but actually, if you broaden how you define replacement, like we don't have to talk about replacing entire organs. I mean, you can grow small amounts of tissues, certain types of blood cells, for example. There's the important HSCs, which are what produce most of the cells in your blood, which you could potentially grow and transplant. Hematopoietic stem cells. Okay. So replacement can look, it's very broad, and actually already today you could start to do some of this. So there's also companies in replacement space who are growing oocytes. So that's basically the eggs that you would use to make a baby if you're a woman. If you're past menopause age, you no longer have any of your own oocytes, but you could grow those outside of the body and use that to make a baby that's essentially genetically yours. So that is also a replacement technique. So you could do it on a cell stage, you could do it at a tissue stage, and then eventually on an organ stage or even a whole body stage is kind of the end goal. So we're there. Like we have the techniques to do some of this stuff. There are other challenges about how you actually commercialize this, how you actually do it on a big scale. There are lots of regulatory challenges, but from a scientific perspective, actually replacement is much more achievable than some of the advanced bioengineering stuff. If we really want to defeat aging. With the
oocytes, that is just a fascinating area of, it's crazy as we're speaking right now. I have a sibling that is literally on general anesthetic getting their eggs frozen. Like, I'm not even kidding, right now in this moment. And it's having been around women that go through that process and just realizing like what a huge space the fertility space is. If we're able to do that, that's just going to be such a huge breakthrough. But when you look at whole body replacement, the idea that we could grow a whole body without the cortex, which seems to be the challenge. It seems to be easier to clone a body than it does to build the whole body and then not make them conscious. Like, what sort of time horizons are we talking about?
Yeah, these are difficult problems, and there are companies working on this. They're in stealth. Can't reveal too much about them, but the general concept on this, if you didn't have any ethical qualms, you could do most of it today. So if you were a dictator in some country and wanted a clone of yourself, you can already go and grow one. You can create, a clone embryo of yourself. You could get a surrogate to carry it to term, and you could grow a body to age 18 with a brain. And eventually, if you're a dictator, you could kill them and try and transplant your head onto their body. And now, no one is suggesting that you should do that. It's very unethical, but basically most of the technology is there. The main challenge is how would you reattach the spinal cord after severing it. But that's, on the scale of engineering challenges, much smaller than changing your entire genetic code to not age, right? So yeah, if you have no ethical issues, it's probably pretty achievable. Now, in practice, most of us do care about ethics and about morality, and we don't want to kill people in order to live forever. So there are much different. There are a lot of other challenges to tackle, and how to do this scalably in a way that like would benefit, most of the population. So yeah.
It also it brings up the question of what it means to be human, what it means to be conscious. Are we only conscious in our brains, or do we hold some consciousness in our bodies, in our gut, in our hearts?
It's a good question. Maybe above my pay grade, but
it's an important one, right? In the space as well.
Yeah.
When you start looking at whole body, or even the replacement. When you hear about people with heart replacements, and
you hear about that. I think the brain is necessary for consciousness, generally speaking. So yeah, I wouldn't worry that maybe there'd be some consciousness based in the nervous system of the heart or the gut or something like that. A lot of this cloning stuff, it's still a little ways out because the efficiency of primate cloning is low. But there are several
What do you mean
groups,
by efficiency?
Like for every implanted embryo, most of them don't make it to term. So the Chinese, Germans, and Americans have cloned primates already, a couple different species, but cloning humans may prove to be a little more difficult. But there are groups that have already improved cloning efficiency in like mice and other species significantly. So applying that to primates could be very important. Also just for cloning primates for medical research and other applications. But this is all still sort of a little further out. An area that is already available to us today is embryo selection. So when you do IVF, you may get a dozen embryos out to select from. How do you choose the best one? It's a forced choice problem in game theory. You have to pick one. And currently, the way that IVF clinics do it is they kind of look at it and say, yeah, the karyotype, the picture of the chromosomes looks pretty good. Go with that one. There are some rudimentary sequencing-based methods now, but one company that we invested in called Harborne has come out of stealth mode recently, and they do polygenic scoring for disease risk, for longevity, and even for intelligence, which polygenic means instead of looking at just one gene mutation, so there are a lot of diseases that are caused by a single locus, single mutation, Tay-Sachs or cystic fibrosis, things like this. Most diseases are not that way. Most diseases are influenced or predicted by a whole lot of genes, hundreds or thousands of genes working together in concert. And so that's why we need these polygenic risk scores that, while not deterministic, they can actually be pretty predictive. So things like physical height or intelligence are actually highly heritable. And so this company, Harborne, has come out of stealth mode recently. They have prominent supporters, prominent Silicon Valley founders, et cetera, working with them to do embryo selection to, first of all, reduce the risk of serious diseases and increase longevity. But intelligence is one that people actually care about a lot. And they can increase intelligence by rank ordering those embryos.
Can I just say something, Will? Because you mentioned to me a few days ago that at your university, you went to Cambridge, one of the best universities in the world. There were certain countries that would
other than Oxford, second only to Oxford,
would give out flyers looking for people to donate their sperm or eggs. It's already that's just a less modified way of gene selection.
Yeah, we've always, humanity has always done this. I mean, people choose their partners based on many things, looks, intelligence, but also fitness, in terms of like how, and I think that there's a natural selection for people who are healthy. And I think it's hard to overstate how important this kind of technology will be for us on a societal scale. In some countries, more than 3% of people are now doing IVF. Many of my friends, your sister, freezing eggs and doing IVF. And it's going to become more common. There's fertility issues across the whole Western world, at least. And if you could, during that process, ensure that everyone has lower disease risk, cancer risk, heart disease risk, many other traits, and increase lifespan, even all the other technologies we're speaking about, which are very exciting, this one could dramatically transform, in terms of number of extra years added to the population across the whole planet. And I think that is the future. I mean, these kind of technologies are now being used in a small way by people in San Francisco and others to ensure that their children are going to be healthier. potentially have higher IQ. But imagine if, for example, in the UK, the NHS said that anyone who's doing IVF can access this treatment, can access this for free to also ensure lower disease risk for their children. I think there'll be a flipping point in the future where it's no longer just, an extra bonus that some people might want to have. It's almost a responsibility to make sure your child is healthier by selecting the right embryo. And it is your, unlike when people ask to, get eggs from Cambridge students, it is your child. It's just one of many you could have had.
There's a lot of, we're talking about a number of different areas of the longevity space that are shrouded in ethical controversy, right? This is, really in the realm of playing God. And we also don't know what the effect of having lots and lots of beautiful, high IQ children will actually do for society. It might actually have a negative effect if everyone can choose a certain type of person. Have we evolved to be, you think about the tribes that we evolved, so we had, night owls and people that could woke up early and people that are, I don't know, a little bit lazier or whatever. Would society function if everyone was the same?
Sure. So we don't have to worry about that quite yet. Embryo selection, it's not going to eliminate all genetic diversity. It's a pretty gradual process, right? One way to think about it is if you have 10, 20 embryos to select from, how do you have the healthiest, best baby that you can of that set? So it's still going to be your kid. It's just, the best baby that you could have. And we've talked about in vitro gametogenesis. You take skin cells, turn them into egg cells, and you can do that on a large scale, thousands, hundreds of thousands of eggs. And now you have a lot more statistical power. Then we can start to worry about, what the consequences might be if everyone has sort of an Einstein type baby. But there's a reversion to the mean. There's a good book on this for viewers who are curious by Professor Jonathan Anomaly called Creating Future People. And he goes through all of these arguments over many decades and even predicts some of the, unexpected runaway challenges that we might encounter here. For example, altruism. Like most people, we like people who are highly agreeable, altruistic, nice, but you can overdose on that, right? Like if we had a society where everyone is sort of a pushover, could be an issue. Or height, height in men will be selected for. But you do run into health issues when you get too tall, right? So the question is, for IQ, this is the one that's spiciest that people most like to think about. And I think it is one of the most important because it benefits society the most if we could increase IQ. It actually, a lot of people think that super smart people have consequences, right? Maybe they're more depressed or anxious, stuff like that. It's actually a myth. It's the reverse. There's less neuropsychiatric disease in smarter people. It's true that there's a slightly increased risk of Asperger's, but it's a tiny effect size. The only thing that does seem to be consistently correlated with higher IQ is anorexia, but it's, again, a small effect size. So
it's fascinating.
Anyway, I think embryo selection is going to be the most important public health advance of our generation or of our era.
But I think, in terms of ethical challenges, I think everywhere in, let's say, like moonshot longevity, these kind of like cutting edge technologies, you bump into these questions. And I think even on the question of should we even extend lifespan beyond what's natural, I mean, many people would consider it, we consider that itself to be an ethical question. Yeah. Now, I think it really comes down to what's your philosophy, why do you think humanity is here, what's our purpose? And everyone has a different view on that. But fundamentally, I think if we take a basis that life is good and we want to extend it, many of these technologies should be considered ethically good. And so, I would always take the view that if we can, through whatever means, find ways to extend healthy human life and reduce death, slow or reverse or defeat aging, these are technologies which must exist, which should exist. And we're going to have to tackle lots of questions, both from a ethical, but also just a regulatory point of view to get them to exist, but they should exist.
Can put it another way, there's philosophically, you can state the counterfactual. So let's say it were possible for grandma to live an extended 10, 20 years of healthy life. Some people might argue against that on the basis of, healthcare costs. We have to pay to take care of older people, or pension costs. The pension thing is relatively easily solved if we're living longer and healthier. First of all, we'll have a much more prosperous society, and so we can afford to pay people's pensions. But people may want to work a little bit longer if they're in good health anyway. Healthcare costs, we're never in a position where we say, oh, actually, maybe we should just let grandma pass away or do euthanasia in order to save healthcare money, right? That would be ridiculous. And so by not investing heavily and prioritizing longevity biotech, we are in effect saying, let's, save money or not prioritize the lifespan of our loved ones. A lot of people also say, oh, I'd probably like to live to age 80 and then I'm happy to die. You're not going to feel that way when you're 79, right? There's this hyperbolic discounting of time. And as long as you're in good health and happy, I think people are going to want to continue living. I mean, don't you want to have another Christmas with your family or holidays with your family? So I think extended life, once we've sort of achieved post-scarcity with all the AI and robotics and whatever technologies, however long that ends up taking, we're always going to want extended healthy lifespan. And you can always end your life if you've decided you've had enough. But just giving people the option to continue to live on is very, I'd say, the most valuable thing. It's also good for society. So imagine if our most productive members of society, Einstein or von Neumann or Tesla lived another century. Knowledge sort of builds upon itself. And so they could continue to be productive for so much longer. And so a lot of people feel, when they're coming to their last few decades, they're like, I still have so much more life to live. I feel like I'm just getting started. I finally learned all the lessons and now I can be effective. But they're affected by cognitive decline often.
But the flip side of that is you keep the best in society there, but also the worst of society there.
Yeah. I think there are better ways to control negative aspects of human behavior than letting everybody die. So, we have legal structures and, people often say, okay, well, what about dictators? Like, we often rely on dictators to pass away for the countries to get better. In actual historical fact, I'm not sure that's true. I mean, often if it's an authoritarian state, from Lenin to Stalin, right, it sort of continues regardless of the person who's there. And a lot of dictators and politicians, especially really bad ones, don't often die from natural causes anyway. But I would make that trade. If we could achieve biological immortality or significantly extend lifespan, the gains to society would be so profound that we could tolerate some dictators living longer. And I think dictatorships just on a long time horizon are declining in popularity. There's just not that many left anymore. I'm
playing devil's advocate here because I know there's always a win-lose to any situation, but clearly the gains are very large.
We're never going to run out of problems to solve, right? If we did solve longevity and everyone lives forever, there will be other problems to solve as a result of that, including how do we reduce dictators living forever or all these other issues. I think this is such a big problem, we should tackle it first and then,
of course.
Yeah.
And then this is like super Moonshot. It's the idea, it is called whole brain emulation for those that haven't heard about it. It's the idea that eventually we could basically download ourselves into the cloud and have our conscious minds in a somewhat virtual world. And also, I'm assuming, be able to teleport ourselves to another body that's, let's say, based in Mars or wherever it is. Will, are you interested in this space?
Yeah, I think I'm interested in here, and I think it's, if we look at those categories we spoke about, advanced bioengineering, I think for most people on the planet would be their preference. If you can change your existing body to live forever, great, you'd want to do that. If you can't, maybe you want to go to replacement where you can swap in different organs or somehow kind of replace the damaged parts and live longer. And the third option, I think, strays more into kind of transhumanism. It's actually like, what, as you asked before, what is consciousness? Like, who are we? And do we even have to exist in this physical form? Could we upload to a cloud? This is like, I think there's an entire range of really interesting companies working in this space. And, there's different approaches like actually cryo kind of comes in here as well, where you can freeze your body, essentially looking at, if your consciousnness is basically information captured in your neurons, can you record that a different way? Can you, this company's sort of slicing up brain into chunks and storing that in certain compounds so that it can be preserved and later on scanned. But yeah, I think there's so many questions about what you would look like there. So even within the brain emulation space of, let's say you manage to somehow capture all the information from your brain, store it some way, and then run it on some sort of future server system that allows you to basically think and feel as if you're alive in some simulation, or even interact with the real world. There's sort of high fidelity brain emulation where you're then actually trying to like exist exactly as you are now. So you'd have to basically exactly replicate all the pathways in the brain. Or low fidelity simulation, which is maybe more achievable, where you capture the most important pieces of information, but then fill in the blanks with basically AI. So you're somehow some merged version of yourself with an AI system. It's potentially more of it, like we're potentially closer to that. You know, we can already basically have, we can also already basically train AI systems on messages that people have sent via email and whatever, and create a pretty realistic version of yourself in terms of personality. Is that you? I think most of us would currently say no, but you know, if it was trained instead on reading the shape of your neurons, that starts to look much more like you. But yeah, I think these are far off, but definitely interesting questions, and I think we're probably going to see a lot more going on in that space. One really interesting company is trying to then map the entire connectome of the brain to try and basically be able to read the shape and pattern of your neurons, which is kind of a prerequisite for doing some of this.
And the connectome is really linked to consciousness, right? Well, they think is...
Well, that's what we would guess, right? I think I would assume, and a lot of people would assume, that if you could in some way map your entire brain and then replicate that in software, it should perform pretty similarly to your consciousness. But yeah, we don't know enough yet about what consciousness is and how it actually looks and feels. But that would be realistic to assume that if you can basically capture all the information, you can probably simulate the brain.
Utterly fascinating what the human mind is possible of not only achieving, but dreaming of. Even having these conversations. And we look at the Overton window, the idea that, you know, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, we thought this was possible. And even having these conversations, I'm sure some of the listeners will be hearing this for the first time and thinking, wow, this is just insane in both an engineering idea, but also in like creative, like just to think of these ideas. It's insane. And in a good way, I should say.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I just want to underscore that a lot of the stuff that we talk about in longevity biotech, it's not in the realm of philosophy, like whole brain emulation or mind uploading Kurzweil style is. The hard problem of consciousness, etc. We probably could emulate a human, clone a human in silico, so it would behave similarly, but transferring consciousness is a whole other problem. In longevity biotech, we have the results in the lab, hundreds of labs all over the world, top journals showing lifespan extension by up to 50% across many different species. This is not a question. There's no philosophical question. This is a fact. And it's not just one type of lifespan extending intervention. It's many. It's dozens that we can combine for synergy. So this is here today, and it's not getting enough attention. So there's a lot of attention being given to sort of lifestyle longevity. Our friend Brian Johnson's doing a lot to popularize the biohacking and how to optimize your lifespan today. That's great, but that will probably only extend lifespan maybe 10 years or something. What we're interested in are the radical approaches that re-engineer the hardware such that we can get many decades of extended healthy lifespan. And so yeah, the results are in. We know that we can extend healthy lifespan. It's not in the realm of philosophy. And yet, pharma doesn't pay that much attention to it. The field, we track the amount of money coming into the field, and it's trivial, 1% of the total R&D budget of big pharma or academia. So it is still very contrarian, very early, but we think we're at the right sort of knee of the curve to be investing.
I think even the fact, to be honest, that we and other funds are now starting to look more at radical lifespan extension is because getting health span increases is becoming more consensus now. Like we kind of know from what's coming even through the pipelines in the next 5 to 10 years, there are going to be drugs on the market which people, the normal people can go and have, which will probably make them be much healthier into their 90s and beyond, and potentially live up to 120. The question that we're now starting to tackle, and that the industry is starting to tackle, is how do you go beyond that? And that's where some of the technologies that we're talking about and investing in will take us even further. But that's only because of all the work that's happening already to mean that we're going to get to that point.
So you have Brian Johnson and Kim Kardashian taking stem cells and gene therapy now. What else would you, for you guys as a fund, and because you have investors and invest in you, what are the other low-hanging fruits that you see in the radical healthy life extension that you're investing in over the next 5 years?
Yeah, I can start us off. So we've thus far been talking about the Moonshot, sort of a really spicy, exciting things. We have a pretty diversified portfolio in terms of risk profile. So most of what we do, and my background is hardcore pharmaceutical development, drug discovery type stuff that has been done for a century in pharmaceutical companies. And there are things that therapeutics you can already take today, like rapamycin, metformin, acarbose, SGLT2 inhibitors. These are FDA-approved drugs that are widely prescribed that extend lifespan across species in Healthspan as well. And so we are investing in some of these sort of lower-hanging fruit therapeutics that big pharma already knows and loves. One example, we've invested in a company developing enhancers of mitophagy. So your mitochondria are extremely important for energy production and many other processes, and they get damaged with age, but the body can break down the damaged mitochondria and rebuild new ones. Mitochondrial biogenesis is the rebuilding, and mitophagy is the clearing of the old ones.
And for context, there are already supplements out there which likely work on these pathways. So popular NAD+, NMN, NR, sort of precursors to that, plus urolithin A, which is kind of quite popular in the kind of biohacking community. These are in different ways potentially inducing mitophagy or helping your mitochondrial health. But yeah, there are many better things coming through the pipeline which do that even more successfully. And the nice thing about mitochondrial health and mitophagy is that it happens in every single cell in your body. So if you can, get that to happen, you're not just influencing one aspect of your health, but you're going to feel better, you'll have more energy, you'll be able to think more clearly, you'll potentially have resistance against many types of neurodegenerative diseases. So yeah, that's something that's very possible. And as Sebastian said, we've invested in companies in that space, and something we're very excited about, because that could be a pill that everyone on the planet just takes every day with breakfast, that keeps them healthy and aging better over time.
Yeah, another area we're very interested in is DNA damage and repair. So the hallmarks of aging define the molecular drivers of aging. We know what these are, kind of like the standard theory of particle physics, standard model. We know what all of the players are. And this is credited to decades and decades of hardcore molecular biology research. So we know what a lot of these are. And for example, DNA damage and repair is really important for aging. I'd argue perhaps the most important hallmark. It's primary, driving a lot of the others. And some examples are humans who live a long time in good health are called supercentenarians, over 100 years in good health. And a lot of these people have been genome sequenced, and we've identified a handful of genes that are enriched in these populations and driving it. And then we worked out the biochemistry, what these genes are doing. And a lot of them are to do with DNA damage and repair. Furthermore, we know that people who have accelerated aging diseases called progerias, very sad diseases where people age really rapidly. You might be 10 years old, but you look 70.
Wow.
There are many diseases like this. They're very rare, fortunately. They're almost all mutations in DNA repair or metabolism factors. And so that's another clue that when DNA repair isn't working, you age faster. There's also evidence between different species. So comparative longevity research. Vera Gorbanova at the conference talks about this. We know that bowhead whales and many other species of primates, longer lived primates, have better DNA repair capacity. So these are all clues. And yet, there are very few companies, biotech companies, working on enhancing the fidelity of DNA repair. So I always tell prospective founders, scientists who are going to start companies, look into this approach. Another interesting one is telomere attrition. So the ends of your chromosomes, you have these, think of them like shoelace caps. They protect the chromosomes. They get damaged every time a cell divides, kind of like an internal clock in the replicative lifespan of the cell. And this evolved to protect us from cancer because it prevents cells from proliferating indefinitely like tumor cells do. Problem is 80% of cancer cells, they reactivate this enzyme called telomerase, which is really the immortality enzyme. There was a Nobel Prize in 2002 or so for this work. Turns out you can add this enzyme to cells and it will immortalize the cells. So there's a company we're looking at financing now that is applying this to cell therapy manufacturing. One of the biggest bottlenecks in the industry of cell therapy is you just can't get your hands on enough cells or they age too fast to distribute widely. And so by reactivating telomerase in a particular way, you can expand the supply of these cells, apparently indefinitely. Another interesting one we're looking at is repairing the gut barrier. So this is a group out of Harvard Medical School, phase 2 clinical stage drug that is a pill that you pop that basically supplements a naturally occurring protein that repairs the gut barrier function. So one of the problems with aging, as Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, once said, death begins in the gut. We get leaky membranes across many tissues, especially the gut, cause local and systemic inflammation, causes autoimmune disease, neurodegenerative disease, etc. And so by repairing the gut barrier, repairing leaky gut, it can apply to many different age-related diseases. So these are some of the more sort of pharma-friendly, low-hanging fruit type stuff. I mean, last night we had dinner with some very prominent pharma people, BD leader from Novartis and ex-Lonza. So they're very interested. They're here at the conference. The smartest, most sort of future-minded among the biopharma execs are here. So I think that's why it's going to be a pretty quick shift. Once there is that sort of GLP moment when people realize, wow, there are bona fide longevity drugs that make us feel better, look younger, et cetera, there's going to be this mania for longevity biotech. So we're hoping to be positioned there to allocate the capital to the best companies.
Well, what would you say is the GLP-1 of longevity that will come to market in the next 3 years?
I mean, honestly, the way that we look at the space, we are only investing in technologies which could become GLP-1s. And that's because of the fact we look for these underlying aging biology targets. Almost always, if it is a real target in the body that you're trying to modify in some way that is related to aging, it can impact many different diseases. And so that company will try to initially probably get their drug or therapy or whatever it is approved for some limited indication, but then it should have an ultimately addressable population of everyone on the planet because that's who suffers from aging. The one that was just mentioned with mitophagy is a great example where it won't initially be approved for aging. It'll be approved for maybe kidney damage, or it'll be approved for some metabolic disease similar to GLP-1s, but end up then potentially just being a daily pill. So yeah, that's kind of, I think, actually the fundamental reason why the return on investment in this space, in longevity biotech, looks so attractive, even compared to, especially compared to other types of biotech where you're just maybe targeting a rare disease that maybe 70,000 or 100,000 people on the planet have. The ultimate market's everyone. And so yeah, GLP-1 is kind of the model that I think all good longevity biotech companies would eventually want to follow.
And it's inspired pharma too. They see what it's like to have a really broad market for these therapeutics. If I were to bet on a therapeutic modality that would potentially double our healthy lifespan, probably would be gene therapy. But within the next 3 to 5 years, we have to bet on things that are sort of already in wide use. And so I would point to certain peptides. So GLP-1 is a peptide, but there are many of these sort of small proteins that are used by, athletes and people like that to repair their tissues, like joint injuries, things like this, as well as stem cell therapy, like mesenchymal stem cells. MSCs were recently just approved in the United States company called Mesoblast got approval for graft versus host disease. And now they're going to label expand to many other indications. And so, the evidence in animal models is very compelling for mesenchymal stem cells. Also, you can take the secreted factors produced by stem cells. So you don't need the cells, but you take sort of the regenerative anti-inflammatory factors like exosomes that are being widely used. The challenge with a lot of these off-label uses, stem cells, peptides, there are a lot of doctors out there who are not very rigorous or not very high quality product. Maybe they're synthesized in some country where they don't know the quality. So there's a lot of variance in the benefits that people are seeing. But once it becomes more mainstream and quality controlled, we're going to see pretty profound increase in interest in peptide therapy, stem cell therapy. And I think the GLP moment, it could be something cosmetic, so like reversing a wrinkle, something like this, and there are groups working on this. But it may be in a super common disease like arthritis. So it's the most common age-related disease. There are groups working on, say, regrowing cartilage, chondrocyte stem cells, but even just injecting locally or systemically stem cells like mesenchymal stem cells or umbilical cord-derived MSCs. People are getting acute benefits, sometimes complete cures of ailments that have afflicted them for years.
Yeah, there's an interesting crossover with kind of aesthetic therapies and treatments into longevity, which kind of seems funny to people who are working in, serious biotech or aging research. But the reality is one of the big drivers is people, want to look good. And so, gene therapies, which we might look at and go, okay, this can extend your lifespan by maybe 10 years because it's helping you to have healthier muscle and not have frailty in old age. Other people might look at and go, oh, it can give me bigger biceps or a bigger bum. And actually that pathway to getting a lot of therapies approved, including like skin creams and things like that, which make your skin look better, are likely going to be the kind of way that these go mainstream rather than initially for aging. And that, it's interesting. But I think it says a lot about human nature, but also it's a great thing because it's something which longevity companies can sort of harness and use to get to market faster.
It's so interesting. We look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Bigger bum is at the top.
Exactly, mate. But it's interesting when we think about what people's needs are in the world. And the vast majority of people that are looking at the longevity space fortunately have the privilege of not having to deal with other things. And so that's one thing. But also looking at instant gratification, I think the majority of people in the world would rather want the gift or the value enhancer today rather than in 20 years or 30 years. And that's the beauty of GLP-1s. Again, I know a lot of people that have taken them, and within 2-3 months, they're telling me like, Julian, I think you should lose some weight or whatever. And I'm like, what? Like, you've lost. But yeah, it's more the fact that they've been able to lose like 15-20 kilos in the space of time. It's incredible. So it's the piggybacking of these therapeutics onto something else. Yeah.
Something cool about GLP-1s is, in some ways, they're the first widely used longevity drug because GLP-1s, they work by reducing appetite, induces fasting in many people. And fasting, for thousands of years, most religions prescribe fasting for spiritual and physical health benefits. But we've known for, over a century in the longevity biotech field, that fasting is one of the best interventions to slow aging. In every way that we look, fasting benefits you. A lot of the benefit derives from autophagy. So we mentioned mitophagy, specifically breaking down mitochondria, but autophagy is when the cells break down most components, all components of the cell, and then rebuild them. So it's almost like a rebirth. And the first company I founded is developing drugs for autophagy enhancement, because what if we could have the benefits of fasting without the difficulty of doing so? There are many people, say, with health conditions who can't fast at all. And so you can have your cake and eat it too.
Well, being a former tech and crypto founder, you understand technology incredibly well. What role do you think superintelligence will play when it comes to radical life extension in this next chapter?
Yeah, I think ultimately we spend a lot of time as investors, especially thinking about that question. So, timelines vary on how close we are to superintelligence. and how AI is going to impact every other space. But it's certainly over like our fund lifespan, which is 10 years, going to be transformative in biotech. And biotech, I think, is one of the biggest beneficiaries of AI already. Actually, a lot of new drugs are being discovered basically because of better computational models, better ways of using the data we already have. There's still a bottleneck there actually in biotech, in that we don't have as much data as we do in other spaces. And so a lot of people are working on how do we index and collect much more so that we can harness it better. But I think longevity biotech is going to be one of the biggest beneficiaries of AI. It's just a question of how long it's going to take for that to happen. Is it going to be over the next 3 years, suddenly there's a huge unlock, or is it going to be more like 10 years because there's still a lot of data that we need to collect to actually understand better the range of proteins, the range of genes and other things that we need to put into these models. But yeah, this is any company now that we look at which isn't in somehow using basically computational tools, new frontier AI tech to at least accelerate their progress and move faster. It becomes really difficult to kind of make the case, because the companies that do, even if in just a limited way, will basically require less money and less time to get to the point where they can start to go through the regulatory pathways.
So one of the biggest call to arms with the longevity space is that we have an aging population. We have declining fertility rates in pretty much every developed country. And we're soon going to reach peak world population. And so actually we have this thing called a silver tsunami that's happening, and we need younger feeling individuals in society. It's probably a subject that isn't really talked about with a lot of people when they look at the longevity space. They just think of billionaires wanting to live forever.
Yeah. So silver tsunami, global demographic aging crisis has been brought up by a lot of prominent thinkers. And I like to highlight it because it's not getting enough play or airtime compared to other issues people are concerned about, whether it's global war or climate change or what have you. Those are risks, but they're not 100% guaranteed to occur in the way that demographic aging is. There is nothing that we can do, no amount of money or smart policies will create more 25-year-old, working age population relative to our retirees. This is a critique that some sort of government-minded people have, which is, we don't want people living too much longer because we do have this demographic pyramid imbalance. I would actually say we want people living longer and being more productive, and importantly, drawing less on the healthcare system. So in the United States, it's about 20% of GDP spend, and we're like 40th in the world for health outcomes, right? So obviously there's a problem specific to the US, but if we could reduce the proportion of our population who's infirm, who's sick, that would be a huge economic dividend. And actually, this has been calculated, has been published in Nature by some longevity folks. Even 2 or 3 years of extended healthy lifespan, the population level is worth tens of trillions of dollars. It's just unfathomably beneficial to the economy. And so global demographic aging, silver tsunami, it's not like climate change where, there's a debate about the severity and what we can do to intervene, et cetera, technologically. With population aging, it is baked into the cake. Demographers say demography is destiny. And so, and very few people in politics or elsewhere have a plausible solution. One mitigating factor is just slowing the aging process, buying more years of extended healthy lifespan so we can buy more time for technological improvement and to deal with the global debt problem, et cetera. So I wrote an article about this, comparing it to climate change. Climate tech gets huge amount of funding, many billions of dollars. People talk about it all the time. There are all these conferences about it, but it's not 100% guaranteed to occur. And if it does, the severity is debated as well. Whereas with population aging, it could get to a situation where there's an Alzheimer's care home on every street corner, and a huge amount of our personnel in the economy are tied up caring for older people.
I think it's interesting to compare with the other solution, which is kind of posited to this problem, which is, I think, coming from kind of the tech world of San Francisco, are very much like humanoid robots everywhere and AI. And yes, that will maybe solve this problem somewhat in that you have, basically humanoid robots doing a lot of the work that humans do today. But then you're left with still these Alzheimer care homes and all humans in really bad health. And so, how do we want to solve this problem? It should be in terms of maximizing positive human experience and life, rather than just papering it over with, AI and robotics.
And I also I think we're in agreement on this. I don't think the scale of robotics will come soon enough, because we're hitting sort of the most difficult demographic aging period over the next 10, 20 years. And within the next 5 years, for example, in the United States, Social Security pensions is set to, go bankrupt or not make payments. So the whole US government policy today seems to be, let's double down on AI and robots such that we can outgrow the mounting debt burden and the other challenges in society. And that's a hell of a gamble. I'm not sure that we will win that race. And so we should be firing on all cylinders, all kinds of different areas of technological advancement beyond just the sort of hardware stuff. I also think AI is significantly overhyped in the near term. Peter Thiel talks about this, overhyped in the near term, underhyped in the long term, but it's going to be the real long term. I mean, for example, a lot of the benefits that we are seeing from the genome sequencing revolution in, I think it was 2001, there was the human genome was sequenced, and there was all of this excitement. There was a bubble around it. And only now are we sort of seeing some of the promises being delivered around that. So I think it could be 20 years before we see the kind of significant economic progress from AI and robotics. You have a background in manufacturing. Installing the capacity to pump out these robots is going to take a very long time and a lot of capital too. So as far as superintelligence goes, I'm sort of more in the contrarian camp where we should be looking to biological superintelligence. We should be cloning geniuses, even though there's a long lead time, because I think we'll get to superintelligence that way before the AI. I think the AI is going to plateau. And the robots, they'll be able to do manufacturing and things like this, but there's no plausible way that more sort of Tesla-style robots is going to improve our health, right? And once you have all of your material needs met, health is, the rate limiting. It's the most valuable thing that we can have, and no amount of money can acquire more of it. So I often joke there are only a couple things that money can't buy today. So if you're a multi-billionaire, you can't buy true love, right? So as the Beatles sang, in fact, the wealthier you get, probably harder it is to know who actually likes you. You can't buy easily sovereign state protection. So let's say you're a wealthy person from an authoritarian country. You need to go to another country to be protected from frivolous, theft of your wealth. Maybe you're coming from China or wherever. So it's very difficult to buy protection from a sovereign state. But the third thing is extended healthy lifespan. It doesn't matter how good your, yoga routine or your ascetic diet and lifestyle is, your Brian Johnson times 10, that's probably only going to extend lifespan based on the animal data where we do everything right, by maybe 10% or so. And so as a society, hopefully we'll eventually become wealthy enough that all of the other Maslow's needs are met, and we allocate more capital to extending healthy lifespan.
When you talk about biological superintelligence, you're talking about this like Homo Deus, this idea that we'll have humans that are, have IQ through the roof and might even have, superhuman capabilities. This is mainly through gene editing, right? Will, I want to go into your crystal ball. When I look at the future, with all these incredible ideas of Homo Deus and biological superintelligence, what do you think the world would look like by 2040?
I think it's very hard to, know where you are on an exponential curve, but we're clearly at some point already on an exponential curve in biotech. We're also on one in AI. And I think the two are going to collide in a way. They benefit from each other, but they're also going to collide. We have this kind of semi-dystopian future that's being predicted by some people in the AI sort of camp. But I think biotech and longevity can kind of present almost a positive counterbalance to that. So ultimately, why are we here? We're here to hopefully have the widest possible range of experience as humans, and to have relationships and positive and negative experiences on this planet. And we can only do that if we're in good health. And so as these tools become unlocked, I think we're going to see a range of choice of what people are going to do with it. And humanity has always been good at sort of using the full width of choice. So not everyone's going to choose the same thing. There's going to be an incredible diversity of how people might want to enhance themselves. I think longevity is going to be a massive part of that, but people will also want to enhance intelligence, enhance strength, enhance all sorts of aspects of themselves using these new biotech tools. And so the world's going to get very weird, but it's going to get very interesting. And I think it's going to be completely different than anything we can imagine, and much faster than we can imagine, and definitely by 2040.
And Sebastian, I think one of the issues that some people will have in listening to this, is that we'll start to see a divide with people that are embracing this sort of technology and all in on it, and others that are just like, well, no, I want nothing to do with it. And then you'll all of a sudden have almost this like duality, this two-layered system where you have superhumans and you have humans that have decided just to take the normal path.
Yeah, well, this is why the enhanced race, we're just all going to go to Mars and it's fine. Just kidding. I'm not bullish on Mars. As a biologist by training, space is a very harsh environment. And so if we're going to have any hope of going to Mars or into space, we're going to need some pretty serious genetic engineering to deal with this. But yeah, so this is discussed a lot, this sort of widening gap between haves and have-nots, even in the current state. There's assortative mating between certain groups. So yeah, you could see that exacerbated in the short term, but in the long term, I think everyone is going to use these technologies, and we can have government subsidize them, right? So like with embryo selection, I'm quite confident will be the most important public health advance of this century. Well, at least thus far. And so it's kind of a no-brainer for governments to subsidize. Governments are subsidizing IVF already, and the cost of embryo selection is just analyzing the genome sequences. It's pretty trivial in comparison. It's hard to develop these algorithms, but once you have them, sort of like developing pharmaceuticals, once the R&D has been done.
Yeah, scalability is something we think about all the time in terms of every one of these lifespan interventions, whatever form they take, whether it's gene therapy or something else. And we're fundamentally looking at technologies that can scale to everyone on the planet. And actually, almost everything we've spoken about today, there's no fundamental reason why, especially when you're suddenly looking at the market of everyone on the planet, they should be expensive. Mm-hmm. Today, most of the reason why drugs might be expensive or therapies might be expensive is because in some cases there are some manufacturing issues, but usually it's because of the cost of development of them and the fact that there's only a small number of people that might have that rare disease. But if we're trying to get 1 billion people to take a gene therapy, we've seen with COVID, for example, it's not so expensive. And I think that's what actually lots of these therapies will look like. They should end up being sort of public health interventions rather than things that are only available to multimillionaires.
Such a good point. Always get people commenting saying, well, this is going to be only available to the rich. And there'll be other people commenting afterwards saying, well, look at every single major technological advancement that we've had, whether in recent years, maybe the iPhone or whatever. In general, people want everyone to have access to these technologies. And I'm sure with longevity, it's going to be exactly the same as before.
Yeah, like take the case of generic drugs, right? They're expensive at first when they're on patent, but it expires over time and then it becomes nearly the cost of production of manufacture. Also, I think people will bootleg drugs that work too well. So like we've seen with GLP-1s, there are all these compounding pharmacies or manufactured in India or whatever. People are getting their hands on it. Yeah. And yet it's still massively profitable for the industry that's invested in the R&D. Speaking about the pharmaceutical industry, this is kind of an important backdrop for what we do in biotech and early stage venture capital. There is a shift occurring where more and more research is being done by small biotech companies, academic spinouts, et cetera, and less by big pharma. So for the last century, big pharma was really the seat, the epicenter of drug R&D. That has changed in the last 20 years. 20 years ago, it was like 10% of the best-selling drugs came from small biotechs or academia. Today, it's about 80% of the best-selling drugs are coming from small biotechs that have to be acquired by pharma. This data comes from Andrew Lowe's group at MIT. We think it's a particularly auspicious time to be investing in biotech because pharma is becoming less and less efficient at internal R&D. So the other night we had dinner with Jack Scannell, who coined the term E-Rooms law, which is the inverse of Moore's law. Moore's law is semiconductor processing power doubles every 18 months, or at least it used to. E-Rooms law is the inverse of that. What's happening in big pharma R&D, it's getting exponentially more expensive to get a new drug approved. And this is in spite of cheaper and cheaper, more efficient tools for drug discovery, from sequencing, proteomics. All of the drug discovery tools are getting better. Pharma is somehow still getting worse and worse at developing new drugs. Jack Scannell talks about some of the factors driving this, but a major one, in my view, is they pick the low-hanging fruit. They're not targeting the root cause of aging generally. And so once you've palliated all of the symptoms, you have to go to the root cause to get any kind of movement of the needle. The other challenge is the industry, there are really only 10 or 20 big pharmas that matter, that have the scale of capital to do these very expensive clinical trials late stage. And they've sort of become cartelized, fat and happy. We were having dinner with a big pharma exec the other day, and he was complaining about all the internal bureaucracy and all these management consultants coming in, telling them to do irrational things. And so just like any, industry, the big incumbent players get sclerotic and will be disrupted by these scrappy, small, efficient biotechs. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing these small biotechs being acquired for sometimes 10 billion or more, early stage clinical companies, because the pharma pipeline is running dry. And they're realizing that within these big bureaucratic organizations, it's not the place to do R&D. So this is a huge opportunity for us as a fund to invest in these companies today. But it's actually difficult for society because there's a real bottleneck in building and investing in these biotech startup companies. So there are only so many biotech founders who are competent to develop these new medicines, and there are a limited number of biotech funds. So there may be about 50 biotech VC funds in the whole world that control 90% of the capital. So it's super bottleneck. And that also leads to groupthink and dogma. So, we're happy to see this proliferation of a lot of different approaches, a diversity of approaches.
So just to round up, Will, if you could give advice to one person looking to enter the longevity space as a founder, as an investor, someone who just wants to better understand how they could live a healthy, long life, what advice would you give?
If we really want to make a big dent into this problem and create long, healthy, happy lives for people, we need to turn to biotech. And actually, all the tools are coming together right now. If there's any message to take away, it's that right now we're at this turning point where however people want to contribute to this space, whether it's through investing, allocating capital, through creating companies, or just through helping with spreading the word, this is the turning point, and we can really feel it.
Yeah, agreed. First of all, you should buy my supplement. That's the most important thing. Just kidding. Supplements are great, to your point. Like, all of this diet and lifestyle stuff is great. We do it. But it's not going to move the needle that much. Probably the most important biomedical advance of our lifetimes will be in the longevity biotech field by extending healthy lifespan, by addressing the root cause, the root molecular causes of damage. In all of our own lives, whether it's fixing something in your house or whatever, treating the root cause rather than a Band-Aid measure is going to be the best course of action. And for most disease today, in the West, but even globally, it's driven by aging. Aging is your number one risk factor for cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, etc. And so most drugs today, they treat the symptoms, the late stage pathology. They're sort of more like Band-Aid measures. But for the first time, it has been possible to address the root molecular cause of aging itself, and in animals even reset the clock to some extent. So for thousands of years, humanity has quested after immortality. You go back to the Code of Hammurabi, etc. Every emperor is interested in immortality, and they have bad ideas like take this mercury or whatever. But now, in the last few decades, the science has advanced to a point where it's not at all science fiction to slow the aging process. We've done it in many different species in the lab, hundreds of labs all over the world. It's kind of surprising to me, having been in this field for over a decade, that there hasn't been a huge amount of capital flowing into it, given where the science is. So, Will mentioned early days of crypto, the technology was there, and yet it still wasn't heavily invested in, or AI some years ago. I firmly believe that longevity biotech, long bio, is at that stage today where the science is in, the proof of concept is there, and yet the capital hasn't flowed in yet. So we expect, hopefully in the next couple of years, it will continue to come in.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
If you want to know what tomorrow has in store like I do, you definitely want to listen to our recent episode where I talked to Peter Diamandis about a future where we could live forever. Thank you so much.